Father, they're beautiful, Ellery exclaimed. Do you really like them, dearest? Her father Aidan asked. She rushed to the hall mirror and began to wrap her horns in the extravagant new ribbons she'd just been given. But my birthday isn't for 2 more days, she said as she wound the beautiful things around her dainty head ornaments. A father doesn't need a reason to dote on his daughter, the hulking tiefling replied. Ellery smiled at this. She knew full well this didn't count as her birthday present. When she turned 18 in a couple days, she fully expected to be lavished with further gifts by her adoring father and brother. She was the apple of their eye and saw no reason to be ashamed of that. Lethal, of course, was out God's new where. Her adopted brother was just like their father in most ways, except, of course, for being a human, and could often be found out carousing. Still, it didn't bother her much, as she never lacked for affection from them. She would just have to pop over to Nomi's house instead. She would appreciate the ribbons far more than her brother would anyway. Nomi had always been sweet to her, so when Lethal had broken the news of their engagement, Ellery couldn't have been more thrilled. Of course, their Assassin's Guild, the Raven's Claw, had always felt like one big family, but now she would have a sister too. Father, I'm running over to Nomi's. I want to show her the ribbons. Take a shawl, the protective voice commanded from their sitting room. It's getting dark out. I know, she replied, as she slipped her cloak from the hook beside their door. I won't be long, she added as she bounded out. It wasn't exactly far to Nomi's house, but not what you would call close either. Nathermore Dool was the largest city on their continent, and Nomi's house was a couple of miles away. She thought briefly that she might snatch Father's horse for the trip, but then remembered that Nomi had no place for her to stable it. Father would be furious if she lost his horse. Best not to upset him right after the ribbons, she thought, and she started off down the road. It was well after dark before she arrived at the little street that turned off to her sister-to-be's house. Of course, seeing in the dark was no obstacle to her. She paused, however, to see no trace of movement inside. Strange, she thought. Surely Nomi would be sitting out on the front porch as usual at this time. As she approached the door, she felt a funny sensation of dread in her stomach. Something is wrong. Surely by now Dingo, Nomi's giant mastiff dog, should be barking up a storm at someone's arrival. She didn't bother with knocking. Nomi wouldn't have expected her to anyway. She opened the door and said, Nomi? No response. She widened the entrance. Nomi, come see what Father's given me. Then she spotted it. Dingo lay unmoving on the floor. She turned on the light to see the full scene illuminated. The house was destroyed. She rushed to the dog. Dingo! She shouted as she shook him. Rolling the dog over, she discovered his fur matted and clumped with blood. She was no stranger, of course, to the sight of blood. Father had always made sure she was prepared for the life that awaited her. She was the daughter of their guild's well-respected leader, and that meant taking part in some unsavory exercises. Still, this was no pleasant sight to behold. Fear for Nomi gripped her. Nomi! She shouted at the top of her lungs as she got to her feet and began bounding through the house. Nomi, answer me! She had just finished screaming as she lurched open the bedroom door. There lay the beautiful-faced young woman, more white than Ellery had ever seen her, except where she was red. And there was so much red. Nomi, she whispered as she crept forward. Horror did not begin to describe the scene that lay before her. Sprawled across her bed, clothes ripped, and hair soaked with blood were not even the first things that grabbed the young tiefling's attention. The most wretched part was the bare and gouged stomach that lay spread open. Ellery braced herself and went closer to understand what she was seeing. Her would-be sister's eyes staring into nothing. She needed to look elsewhere, anywhere but at those vacant eyes. Immediately, she wished she'd simply continued to stare into the sweet face. It was as if horror knew no bounds in that moment, when her gaze landed on the babe's figure within her sister. She was pregnant? She stole herself from the sight, forced herself to stare back into the eyes that couldn't see her. She lifted her hand and carefully slid close the lids of her brother's betrothed. Sleep, sweet sister, she murmured in a rare moment of tenderness. But now it was anger that began to fill her. She resolved to understand. That was the only way she could live with this. She began to glance about the room. There must be some clue as to who did it. It only took a moment for her to find that clue. There, laying next to the body, was her brother's dagger. It was the one Uncle Altier, their godfather, had given him not 2 months ago. Lethal? No, he'd never do this. She continued to look around the room for some other explanation. But the suggestion of her brother's involvement only became more and more apparent. There was one of Lethal's favorite shirts, covered in blood, and on the floor, a picture of the two of them had been shredded into bits. She knew her brother would never have done this, but someone wanted people to think he had. She thought fast. He can't be seen here. She had to get to him as quickly as possible. She thought she might know where he would be, and down the road she took off, dashing with all her speed toward the tavern her brother was known to frequent. Father would clear him. She needed to get Lethal home to Father before anyone else saw the gruesome scene. Fate intervened on her behalf. There he was, walking up the road toward her. She slowed to meet him. Tears didn't often grace her face, but this moment she had no will to hold them back. "It's no me," was all she managed to get out. Without a word, her brother started forward, but she grabbed his arm. "Stop! They'll think it's you," she said, as he tried to pull his arm from her grasp. But these days, she was simply too big for him to outright overpower. "Stop!" she roared at him. She tried to tell him with her eyes what she couldn't seem to find the words to say. "I said they'll think it's you. It looks like you did it." Her mind raced to the babe laid bare in Nomi's stomach, and tears now flowed freely without her consent. She couldn't look him in the eye when she told him this. She couldn't bear to see the pain she knew this would cause him. So she dropped her face as she murmured the words. "Lethal, she was pregnant." Resolve stole her as she looked up to see the horror in his face. He needed her to be strong right now. "We have to go to Father," she whispered. "He's the only one who can clear you of this." She took her big brother by the hand, tears replaced by her resolve. She wouldn't stand by and allow this night to destroy him. She led him through the dark streets toward their childhood home, but the windows weren't lit, and it would be strange for their father to be asleep even at this late hour. Suddenly, Altier stood before them. "Uncle Alti?" she said in confusion. But there was malice in his face. Altier had been their father's best friend and confidant, but the man standing before them was covered in blood. "Life's funny, isn't it?" he said in a cold voice. "You had everything. Wealth, power, and love. But you didn't love her enough, did you, Lethal?" "What have you done?" she heard her brother ask their godfather, and realization swept over her. "I tried to save her!" Altier shouted. "Save her from you! You never loved her. But I would have. You and your reckless father, never caring for the women in your lives. At least, not enough to tell them the truth." Then the worn man tossed an old leather-bound book at Ellery's feet. "You'll want to read that. You'll never get the truth from your brother. And certainly not now from your father." She bent down to pick up the battered tome. "You killed him," she said in a high voice. "Yes, he's gone, little one, and they'll be coming for both of you soon." Ellery started forward, but this time it was Lethal who did the holding back. "Not here, not now," he said. "Not ever!" shouted Altier as he lunged forward. But he hadn't been quick enough. Her brother, in full command of the situation, grabbed her by the arm, and before she knew it, she was running without visible feet, following her brother, trusting he knew exactly where they were going. It hadn't taken her long to recognize the effects of a vanishing potion, and now, as they ran, Altier's words rang in her head. "You'll never get the truth from your brother, and certainly not now from your father." Father was dead. What truth? She clutched the leather book close to her chest as they ran. The following night, they had left their home city far behind and were camping in the Woods of Winds. A bitter chill bit at her as she huddled closer to their fire. It had been her first real chance to inspect the book she now realized to be her father's journal. She opened it to see the old pages worn and torn in places, and began reading her father's words. It was all she had left of him. As she read, she stumbled upon the date of her birthday. She frowned to herself. This would be a bittersweet entry, surely. Her mother had died giving birth to her, or so she had always been told. But that was not what the pages of this book said. Instead of reading the story of loss she had expected, she found in its place a tale far different. Found amongst the wreckage, the slanted script told her. A rival guild had gotten to their targets first, but they had neglected the tiefling babe. I think I'll call her Ellery. She's a beautiful child. I couldn't leave one of my own kind there. It took a moment for the truth to sink in. Father? She whispered to herself in confusion. Then anger began to sweep over her. She stood to her feet and marched over to where her brother had fallen asleep on a bed of dried leaves. "Get up!" she yelled at him. Lethal murmured through his sleep. "I said get up!" she shouted. "What in the bloody hell are you on about?" he retorted. She threw the journal at him. "Did you know?" she asked him. "Know what, you psycho?" "No, I was adopted, you asshole!" she half screamed. The blood drained from his face. Slowly, he began to sit up. "Ellery," he said. "You did know!" she continued screaming. "That's what Uncle Alty meant!" "Elle, calm down," he said quietly. "How could you not tell me?" "Because it didn't matter!" he screamed back at her, finally finding his voice. Ellery dropped herself with a thump onto the ground, still fuming. "Because we loved you anyway," he continued. "You were perfect. Except, of course, when you were being an annoying little twat like you are right now." He chuckled at his own joke. Ellery shot him a look that meant business. "Look, Father made me promise. He knew it had bothered me that I was adopted. He wanted to spare you the same heartache. We couldn't bring your parents back, sis. But we could make it so you never had to hurt over it. I'm still your brother. And Father," Lethal seemed to choke a little on the word, "he loved you so much. He just wanted you to be happy." Ellery could see the tear forming in his eye. Too much. It was all too much to take right now. She knew he was hurting too. She didn't want to cause him any more pain. As much as she knew this wasn't going away, it could wait. For now, it needed to wait. Lethal stood up and walked over to sit by his sister. Together in silence, they sat for a few moments. "Are you okay?" he asked her. "No," she responded as lightly as she could muster. Then, laying her head on her brother's shoulder, she responded, "But we can be not okay together."